As founder, it was 22 years ago that I began. Some of you here helped me from the very beginning, and some of you I'm meeting for the first time today. I want to welcome all of you, and I want you to know how significant today is and how much it means to me, and on behalf of all of us at A Window Between Worlds, how much we welcome you to this family. So, for those of you who are new, I want to share a little bit about what A Window Between Worlds is. We're the only national organization dedicated to helping domestic violence shelters across the country to use art at the center of healing for the women and children and some men that they serve. We reach 16,000 women and children every year through partnership with over 200 sites throughout Los Angeles and in 30 states. And this public conversation is a lab where what we're talking about, what we think about, and what each of you thinks in this room makes a difference to what all of these shelters will do. For 20 years, we've had the art functioning as such a powerful core of change for women and children. To have art be a place of visioning, to have art be often the first time to share something they've never shared before, and to be that seed of profound change on the personal level, family level, community level. But our programs have functioned largely quietly within the shelters and invisibly, but powerfully. Today, over the last few years, and with the help of so many of you here in this room, we've begun to step out with the help of Suzanne, with the help of Kim, those on this panel, to actually have the art not be just within the shelter, not just on that personal level, but impacting the community through exhibits and community engagement projects. And so this conversation is about that intersection. There's amazing leadership in this room from the field of public practice art. There's amazing leadership here from the field of domestic violence. And today is about us thinking about that intersection and what is possible. Today is dedicated to, I think, to the next 20 years of A Window Between Worlds. And I want you to know that your thoughts are so important. That's why you see the blank page in front of you that you each have. There may be ideas you have. There may be suggestions you have. There may be ideas born today that you don't get to say out loud, but we have that paper because we want you to have that lifeline of communication where we will carry forward those ideas. And so I'm just so honored to be here in the Otis Public Practice space, to have Suzanne, who's advised us for many years, hosting us, to have the SCWCA, the Southern California Women's Caucus for Art, sponsoring this event. They helped mentor me from the very beginning when I was one lone artist traveling across the country hoping to make a difference, and became the fiscal sponsor before we were a nonprofit, and have mentored each step of this journey. I'm so grateful for their sponsorship and their presence here today, and for each of you from the LA County Arts Commission, Liberty Hill, the LA Domestic Violence Council, all of you who are here today, every shelter leader, every supporter and partner to Window Between Worlds, and all of you in the public practice program, and all that we can do together. Thank you for being here. And I'm so honored to have our moderator. Betty Ann Brown is a professor of art history at Cal State Northridge. She's an art critic, author, and curator, and amazing moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy is indeed an inspirational woman, and I think that we'll all learn more about her visionary work and what she's done as this afternoon or midday progresses. We'll also learn more about the reason she does her work. Domestic violence is a silent killer. I know people say that usually about diseases, but domestic violence is a silent killer of spirit, a silent killer of family, a silent killer of love. And it is a silent killer that sweeps through and touches all of us. All of us know people who have suffered abuse. All of us know people who have abused. And yet many of us are not aware of this knowledge because of the silence. So today we're going to talk about things that just may make you feel uncomfortable. When I was speaking earlier, this morning with Elizabeth Eastland, who is to my left in the beautiful purple top. She said to me something that we all have heard and know: hurt people hurt people. It is a disease that is spreading through our culture and is not part of the dominant discourse because of shame and ignorance, and frankly, because anything that speaks against male authority is silenced by the culture. So I honor you for making the commitment to come here and engage in what may end up making you feel the best you've felt in a long time, but only after perhaps challenging you with some uncomfortable feelings. It is my repeated honor to tell you that you get to start the panel. We get to start the panel with Kathy Salser, who's going to talk to us about her art practice and how it brought her to founding A Window Between Worlds. Kathy?
Thank you so much, Betty. I just want to share for a moment about why I created A Window Between Worlds and what it means to me as an artist. And when Betty was sharing about domestic violence being a silent killer, killing spirit, killing family, killing love, it made me cry. And it is why art has been important to me in my life. I'm growing up with domestic violence in my home. Art was my safety. It was my refuge, and it was my voice without speaking. I'll just share, when I arrived, the teachers in my first year of college said, "Okay, you can draw." This is one of my paintings. "Okay, you can draw. We're not going to teach you how to draw. Why do you want to do art? What do you want to do?" They asked why. As I was growing up, art, it was such an important place for me, and I did life drawing, and it was my refuge, and it was my way to connect with people. But I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing, and I began to study amazing artists like Suzanne, whose art was not so much about what it looked like. It wasn't about the anatomy, but it was about creating change. And I could feel how much art was for me that window into change. And I began creating art that was about that window into change, and it wasn't about what it looked like. And when I began, I was 24 years old when I set out for what I thought would be one summer, going from shelter to shelter across the country, hoping to share art in a way that would make a difference. And it was an art project. It was a one-summer art project. It was something I knew would grow me, as well as I could share something that would be a source of growth for others. And as I traveled, I created portraits of the women and children that I became close to. But it wasn't a portrait that mattered how it looked. It was a portrait that was marking a change in their lives. They each posed in one position to express what they were leaving behind. And that's her with her hand over her mouth in the back. And then they posed to express their future. And the words that they shared are underneath the surface of the paint, invisible but indelible. Just like for survivors, the experiences can't be fully seen but can't be erased. And she was sharing about the abuse and how you feel this loyalty to those who have hurt you. In domestic violence, her child is the product of incest. And she's struggling with that feeling of loyalty and pain. And in each of these portraits, I wanted the person to get to identify with their body. What am I letting go of? What am I going toward? And I wanted the art to be that marker of change. And as I worked with women and children in that journey across the country, I wanted the art to be that window to notice, what are you letting go of? What are you going toward in your life? And having that window of creativity be sometimes, for so many of them, maybe the first time that they could take hold in a concrete way through the art process of that journey of change. So here, the portraits were actually displayed in the Senate building in Washington, D.C., and The portraits themselves started to be used to raise awareness and tell stories of survivors. But if you go to the next one, Netta, the project quickly became centered on the women and children's own art. Sitting around the table, having that art process be a process of saying goodbye to something and giving birth to something else. This project they're working on is called Funeral of I Can't, where you shred all of your I can'ts and literally create a funeral for them. And the changes to see domestic violence survivors actually be ready to get a restraining order after doing the art project, when talking, writing didn't help make that internal change, but somehow working tangibly with the art helps the internal change happen. If you go to the next one, you can see that these artworks that began to be born of Window Between Worlds, what they look like doesn't necessarily look like art you'd see in a museum, but it is art about creating change in that window between worlds in the lives. For children as well, having that window of time and the changes, for a boy to transform from being so angry and disconnected. This is his monster, and to have him be actually connecting with the other children after creating his monster. If you go ahead to the next. Here I'm sharing Kim, which she'll share more, to begin to work with artists where we're taking it out of the shelter setting. This project, Kim got to engage all of our shelters throughout California. It was 800 participants, and she'll share more about it. So to begin, not just to have the change happening in the internal level in the shelter, but more visibly in the public. Go ahead to the next. We began the next year to work with Barbara T. Smith, an incredible pioneer in performance art, who led, and many of you in this room were there, part of her performance. And this took Funeral of I Can't into I Can, Requiem for I Can't. And I Can'ts were literally destroyed, and it was a collaboration with Nina Jung as well, an incredible installation at Spark. And it had text and a process of releasing the I Can'ts in a community way, so not just the individual in the shelter, but the community, establishing through the art a change they're making in their lives. And now this year, working with Netta has been incredible, taking the work even further with audio in 5 languages and text and welcoming the community. Go ahead to the next slide. Community members are telling their stories, making their decisions of change. Even with Netta sharing it through Skype with participants in Iran, and having the hand become the canvas of the expression of I Can, and that seed of change. So it's so exciting to have Window Between Worlds begin to move out just from the shelter into a community level, and we're grateful to all of you, and collaborating with Elizabeth on this. So I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Let's give this incredible woman a round of applause. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Eastland, who, as I said, runs a program that works with women and men who have suffered domestic violence. And so she's going to talk to us a little bit about that.
Hi, good morning. So Rainbow Services, we've been around for about 30 years. We have shelter and support services provided to victims of domestic violence. In addition, we really advocate on the local and state levels to create change and to bring awareness about the issue of domestic violence to legislators and groups. So we're very much a part of the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, and I was actually selected as part of Cohort 2 for the Strong Field Leadership Development Program, and that is a statewide program that's being funded by Blue Shield of California, and they recognize how important it is to create a stronger movement, a stronger domestic violence movement within the state of California. As a social worker, I absolutely love whenever I get to merge my two passions of social justice and art. I think it is so important, and art really can help us engage community in a much different way. So I've been at Rainbow for 7 years. Prior to that, I did a lot of different types of community art projects. As a therapist, I've done art in individual sessions and support group, and like I said, in community as well, and working in the HIV and AIDS community. Coming to Rainbow has been such an honor to work with Windows and to see that there was already an established relationship and such an awesome relationship with Windows, and to have that support, to not just have to do it all on my own, but to be a part of this community too, where I continue to merge social justice issues with art. So one of the first things I did at Rainbow was, one of the first exhibits we did was this puzzle mural, and we had 40 individual pieces as part of a puzzle. And the centerpieces were, we asked people to depict like a message of hope or how they have healed from the violence that they experienced. And the outer edges, we had asked them to depict what it was like to go through the violence. And do you want to go to the next one? And so it was really interesting. The outer edges were very dark. This one says, when you stay, you hang yourself, and other lives are destroyed, the kids. So women really, and this one was all of the victims that we served. Some of the women had the opportunity to do both what it was like during the violence and what it was like afterwards. Can we go to the next slide? And this is one of the most powerful images for me, the failed family. I think that it really speaks to the shame that is at the core of this issue, and how we really need to address that shame with the people that we serve, because divorce is hard enough, but separation and when there's violence involved, it's just a whole other level of shame. And I feel that the art really assists people in being able to express that in a way that you can't necessarily express in a therapy session through talking. Go to the next slide. And this is another one. A majority of the women that we serve, their first language is Spanish. So we are really grateful to be able to have most of our direct service providers speak Spanish and English. So we encourage people to speak from their native tongue. Next slide. There's just another one of the puzzle pieces. So this was 40 individual pieces, and so that was several years ago. And from there, we've kind of had this parallel process with Windows, in that we went from working with just the survivors that we served to working in the community and engaging community members. And we were able to do our community story tree a few years ago, and we had a local artist draw out the tree, and it was a collaboration. That was 35 individual pieces of some of the survivors that we serve, but then also our staff and members in the community. And that tree came out really to be an awesome experience. And now, as part of the I Can exhibit, we are looking towards the future of how can we continue to engage our community, and how can we also engage men into this movement. Because this is not just a women's issue, it's an everybody issue. It's a family issue. And we are serving young boys in our shelter and in our programs, and we want to be able to help them feel engaged, and also the men in our local community feel engaged into ending this violence in the family. So I think that's about all I want to say right now. Thank you.
Very timely. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. We're going to switch now from providers to artists who work with those providers, which is not to say that Elizabeth and Kathy aren't artists. Obviously they are. But all three of our artists, Suzanne, Netta, and Kim, do a wide range of art projects, only some of which work with domestic violence. Suzanne Lacey is not only a renowned artist, but also chair of fine arts at Otis, so she's doing a little promotion there with her t-shirt. Her books on theory and socially engaged art are fundamental to the building of community through art. And I'm not going to say anything more because she's so incredibly articulate that it would shame me. So.
Thank you, Betty. We go way back. Otis is really pleased to be hosting this event, and this is one of the most fulsome ongoing partnerships we have with the community organization. And one of the reasons is that social practice is fundamentally a kind of art practice that has grown out of very similar agendas to those of feminists from the 70s. And I don't mean to say they're the same agenda, but the notion of community organizing, of engaging people in a broader mission, using art to support social change. those were ideas that were very much part of the 70s feminist movement, particularly in Los Angeles and California. So Otis, as a social practice program, happens to have a whole lot of students, including this one and a few others. Would you raise your hands if you're in the audience? And alums, please. Alums, too. Thank you. We're concerned about these issues of social justice because fundamentally, domestic violence is not, and violence against women is not a gender issue. It's a political, social, human rights issue. And as a result, we're very pleased to have this partnership. I'm going to speak briefly about a project in 2010 that I did in Spain. Turns out that these issues don't go away. They are more exposed now than they've ever been, but they're issues that are maintained in some of very similar kinds of dynamics on a personal level, as well as the way that violence gets reflected within a particular culture and gets enacted within a particular culture are part of this project. So this was in Madrid, although it took place all over Spain, and it's called The Tattooed Skeleton. There are three things I should say about the situation in Spain. The first is that it was under a socialist agenda, so it's a very liberal, progressive agenda, particularly with regards to gender rights and violence against women. There was a section of the government that was established to deal with gender violence issues. Second, that in Spain it was still and is, as of this time, a very dangerous thing for a woman to be public with her violence, with her experience of violence. And in fact, there was a television program where a woman was shown with a masked face, her face disguised, her voice disguised, and she was talking about an experience of violence, and she went back to her community after, within 3 days, her husband had found her and killed her. And the way he recognized her was the ring on her finger. In Spain, so feminist activists have developed the mask as a way to align with women who are in hiding from domestic violence. And yet the mask, which we used as a major aspect of this project, was very controversial and problematic, as we found out. And I'll say something about that in a minute. And finally, the thing I want to point out about Madrid and Spain in general, in terms of domestic violence, is that was the lead issue to talk about all forms of violence. Whereas in the United States, often, I think we entered the discourse through the issue of rape for very particular sociological reasons. In Spain, largely because of the family situation and so on, women made a decision to enter this discourse through the experience of domestic violence and in particular the murder of women by their husbands, of which there are between 70 and 90 a year in Spain. So nevertheless, as a result of this decision, and that is the way that over the past 10 years, violence against women has been symbolically represented in media, there was media fatigue developing, which is this now still the way to tell the story of violence? So I started after great debate. For me to do a project, particularly in another country, I have to know what I might bring to the picture. Political picture. And so after talking with many people in Spain, it seemed to me that one thing that I could do is support a connecting of multiple agendas across the social sphere, artists connecting with the kinds of activists, like what you're doing, the kinds of activists they need to connect with so they're not reinventing the wheel, artists, organizations connecting with the government agenda, and museum connecting with a feminist agenda. So that seemed to be one thing that I could contribute. The feminists that we started with were 8 women in a domestic violence shelter, and we hid their faces as they talked about their bodies. This is a 15-minute film, and we then sent out these masks across Spain, and we asked for stories from across Spain, and we got 400 stories. And we personally wrote those stories on these masks. School children actually wrote them on the stories. This tells you the sites of the performance and the interventions that took place over 3 months. And so I'm just going to show you a few of them, the way this performance played out across the country. So the signs, the stories on masks, television and online performances by activists in Madrid, a convening of politicians and media people and activists to talk about a new way to frame the agenda, and they decided that their agenda for talking about violence would be to tell the story of a woman, the narrative of a woman getting out of the situation. And so they started that. We then took a series of these videos and we installed them in the museum at Reina Sofia, and each one of them talked about the point at which, the dramatic story point, the narrative at which the woman left. Then the night, and this is the night of a 400-person award ceremony, as people from all walks of life, this was the Spanish government, walked into this arena, this auditorium. They saw on their seats one of these masks, and then when our part came on, we showed a video, and that's the video that was the women talking about their hands, their bodies, their hair, and so on. In the middle of this video, we then asked everybody in the audience to put the mask on, and they witnessed the rest of the video through a mask. When we talked to women who had experienced domestic violence, what we found was that they felt the mask was not a symbol of unity, but a mask of oppression, and that's the edge we were dealing with. And then the audience, as they sat there, discovered that they were being watched. And so their images, we were showing the experience of these women and incorporating them into that experience. And then 2 days later, we took those masks and we went out to the street. This is a yearly memorial to the 90 women that are killed. And the crazy coalition of 20 organizations took those masks and made mincemeat of my careful performance strategizing and happily did their ceremony.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Our next speaker, as you know, is not only a computer whiz, hence she gets to run the PowerPoints, but also an incredible artist. You've already learned a little bit about her artwork, and so I'll let her tell us more. Neda, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I only have 5 minutes, so I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to share a little bit about myself and my background. I'm originally from Iran, and I moved here in 2009. I got graduated from the public practice program last year, and my last project that I worked on was called The Anti-Roach, a conversation on art, hair story, memory, and art, and its relation to domestic violence. So I used a really old folklore story and used that as a tool to kind of create conversations with Iranian women in Iran and here in the United States. I worked with more than 100, mostly women and men, and we had consciousness raising sessions in Iran, and afterwards I asked them to kind of express their feelings on pieces of fabric because of the long history of fabric in women's lives in Iran. And then I asked women here to kind of sew all those pieces on a quilt here, and the piece was shown at the Pete and Suzanne Barrett Art Gallery at SMC. And the photo in the middle is a picture of an event we had on the exact same day last year because of the Denim Day. Today is April 24th, and it's the Denim Day, and that was part of the Denim Day as well. So, and then I joined the Windows Between World in October, I think, and we started having meetings and conversations, and which I think that's one of the most important part of this process of kind of how to organize communities and how to have workshops. And because of the confidentiality of all the workshops. We couldn't have any images of the participants, so I'm just going to show you some pictures of the events and how we kind of organized it. I think this is at the Women's Shelter of Long Beach, and this is at the Center for Pacific Asian Families. And so yeah, so we started having workshops, and we worked with more than 400 people. Some of them were survivors, and some of them were affected by domestic violence and sexual assault in some way. After 6 or 7 months, I believe, we had to kind of come up with an idea to show this process in a gallery space, which was really hard because this was a kind of a process-based art project, and it was really hard to think about what is the most important thing that we wanted to show in the gallery space, and how to avoid misrepresentations, and kind of how to engage the other kind of audience that we're going to have inside the gallery, and kind of change the aspect of just having visitors to kind of having participants instead. So I decided to choose 3 themes for this exhibit: surviving, advocating, and acting, which was really important to me as a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault. It was important to me to kind of explore the meanings of those words, and what do they mean in different cultures and different languages. And also for me, that English is my second language, it was really interesting how I couldn't find the right translation for those words, and how I kind of found all those terms and words when I moved here in the United States. So kind of exploring what they mean for people, for different people in different communities, and how some of the meanings are lost in translations. And right beneath the text, so we chose 3 quotes from the participants about surviving, advocating, and acting, and then we translated them into 5 different languages. The quote was in English, and then it was translated to Spanish, Korean, Chinese, and Farsi. And then I designed these 15 posters that had sound modules connected to them, and it said "activate to break the silence" on it. So people could press the buttons and kind of hear the voices of the exact same person that created the hand that was on the poster. So it was really interesting to kind of creating that intimacy between kind of the people coming forward and pushing the button, and kind of getting close to them to listen to their voice. And also for the survivors to listen to their own voice and kind of reflect on what they said and kind of the moment that they had. And the same posters were adopted by the community members in San Pedro. So we had 15 posters inside the gallery, and then 15 posters outside in the community, and the business owners and the community members that adopted a poster, they vended us a chair to kind of represent them in the gallery. So we had a table which was lent by the gallery owner, and then 8 chairs around them. So that was kind of in the middle of the gallery to provide this private space for people to sit around the table and have this conversation, to kind of encourage people to have a conversation about the silent epidemic and start talking about it, and start creating their own hand pieces. We had really empowering interviews in 5 different languages on each iPod, and each panel kind of had different interviews. First one was about surviving, the other advocating, and the last one about how to act in this movement. And there was this special thing about these mirrors that they had a photo on it, and then they were motion sensitive, so whenever a person stepped in front of it, the photo would go away and they would see their own reflections in the mirror. So that was really important to me too, to kind of question their own existence in this movement, and how they're going to help to end domestic violence. So yeah, so people were, they had a really, I think, good time in the gallery. It was, they were able to create their own hands and put it on the wall, and kind of having their own family coming in and seeing their own pieces everywhere in the gallery. So, so yeah, it was a good way to engage another public, I believe.
Thank you so much. Our last awesome speaker is the inimitable Kim ABELES, my dear friend, colleague, homie, and winner of the Guggenheim. Kim.
A few years ago, I had the opportunity to work with A Window Between Worlds. We worked together for 2 years. It was a very, intense journey, I think, for all of us, and for myself included, because I had had a history of both domestic violence and also sexual assault that had been woven through my entire life. But like a lot of survivors, you gain your strength, you move on, and you try not to ever think about it again. So a lot of the way that I began this project was based on the idea that every time I heard the word victim, and even I'm frankly uncomfortable with the term survivor, for the same way that Kathy had mentioned that in a lot of ways you never quite get completely over it. It's always something that is there within your way that you are as a person, and you can move beyond it, but you never get to totally begin again. So I use the metaphor of the pearl and the idea that an irritant enters into the oyster, and in order to protect itself, it creates this pearl, which really becomes a treasure. And the thought was that the women and families that we worked with through this project and through all the Windows projects, they really have a great deal to share with all of us. So the notion that we would tell them how to live their lives, or this is the way you ought to be, really seemed the wrong approach. They had a great deal to tell us instead, and so the whole project was really, fundamentally in that attitude that they had more to share than we had to tell, to them. And so everyone made a pearl, and the ultimate result really was that they would then share their pearls of wisdom. Most effectively, it was always done around the table following the workshop, and those were audio taped and then transcribed, and then a book that contained both the pearls and the words were presented in many forms, including the catalog, as well as some handbooks for living and handbooks for mother and different artist books that I made from those. So you can see the process here. The value with this piece also came out of the fact that the participants really had to learn sculptural processes. They used simple tools, learned how to use pliers and so on, learned how to mix plaster, things that you learn in like a foundations class in a college level. And so there's a certain challenge for any of you that have taken any of those courses. You're working against the materials, finally you're working with the materials, and it is a challenging feat. And working together with the processing groups, maybe somebody could figure out the best way to bend the wire, so they would share it with somebody else. So there was a lot of that kind of sharing that again had to do with the physicality of just making a small piece of sculpture. So the thought was that they would each bring a symbol that reminded them of their abuser or the assault that happened, something that really could symbolize that. Sometimes they brought photographs of the person, sometimes there were, court documents, sometimes there were personal items that really reminded them of that for them. And we also had symbols if, people wanted to look through objects to be able to select, but each pearl really had to contain one of these actual objects. So they would take the symbols, and on Mylar paper they would write their story, and along with the idea of reflecting off the mirror, having to look at oneself when the story was really being written down and told. And then they would crumble this up and choose a yarn or a raffia or other kind of thread and wind it around this piece, and it was a color that they felt empowering or a texture that really resounded for them. And it was really had to be a personal choice in that way, done at whatever rhythm the workshop proceeded for them. Then they wound it with the plaster bandages that are used for broken bones, and then learned to use the plaster and rasps, and then paint them in the color that were important to them. And so the pieces, like I said, were always accompanied by their words of wisdom that went with the pearl. And this is some, sometimes it's simple, like always keep spare keys, do it for the children. And this is the way it was in a couple exhibit formats that we did on these oyster pocket shelves. And you've seen this one. And a table that told the process so the viewers really knew, how that process went.
I told you that they're awesome powerhouses, didn't I? I didn't exaggerate. I'm wondering if anybody has anything that they'd like to share with the larger group at this point.
I was just thinking about what A Window Between Worlds has been doing and all these incredible projects, and this thing popped into my mind, which is an I Can Imagine project, where you're using personal story, and it's like back to the Women's Building. Raise your own consciousness, use that to create dialogue, and then take that out into the culture. But create your own personal stories, and not just about domestic violence, because there's other kinds of violence going on in the world, and I think it's all connected.
Gina and I came up with an idea that we think would be powerful, is to have students just across all ages, age appropriate of course, but to create art dealing with issues of bullying or domestic violence, just again based on whatever would be appropriate for them, and then to display them in the community, the local Ralph's grocery store, libraries, malls, so that there could be a community dialogue about these issues. And so it's not just survivors of trauma that are telling their story, but everyone else as well.
My name is Olivia Rodriguez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Los Angeles County Domestic Violence Council. And so my idea is, as I listened to Elizabeth about the puzzle, is to work on a puzzle that would start with A Window Between Worlds, and it would go to downtown Los Angeles, perhaps the Domestic Violence Council, and then go to the east side, and also to the valley, however we want to do that, but to connect individuals that could make a difference and then want to make a difference to end domestic violence. For instance, since I work in government, that I would engage people in government to come up with solutions to ending violence, and that would be their part of the puzzle. So that's, the idea that I have.
Thank you so much. Warmest thank yous to Kathy for creating this, conceiving this, for having the courage all those years ago to found A Window Between Worlds, and being the kind of visionary who acts on her dreams. Thank you, Kathy. I'd also like to thank all the panelists, Kim, Netta, Suzanne, and Elizabeth, awesome human beings. I'd also like to thank Cheryl Bookout to my immediate right in the beautiful red, who made this event happen. And last but certainly not least, I would like to thank you for coming, for giving us your time, your energy, and your effort. This is how we will change the world together, hand in hand, doing this work. Thank you.